Welcome back to the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamoni, and I'm the founder of the Empower Grief Journey coaching and podcast platform. Today, we're going to be doing something a little different. We're going to be doing a mini podcast with one of the authors from my book that's coming out on Sunday, November 23rd. It's an anthology called The Empower Grief Journey, 23 stories of grief that carved a new path forward. And today's author highlight on our mini podcast is Shaleem Dzon. And her chapter is number 9 in the book, and it's called Return to High Mountain. And Shaleem shares a very powerful story about going through multiple losses in such a very short window of time. And those losses sent her on a big self discovery journey of rediscovering who she was in many ways and also navigating grief through the use of nature and hiking. And so I'm really excited for her to share with you guys a little bit more about her chapter today on the podcast. And so without further ado, Shaleem, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. It's always a joy to just connect with you. And I'm so grateful to be part of this anthology. My name is Shaleem, and yeah, my chapter, Return to that High Mountain Place, it's titled that reason because I have a very strong connection with a high mountain place called Illumination Rock, which plays very deeply into my grief story. So my losses are multiple, like Chris just said. I became a widow when I was 45 years old. My husband was 48 and he died of cancer at home in our bed in my arms. And we were newlyweds. So we had only just been married just a little over a year. And that was my first grief. And that one was enough for a lifetime. Honestly, I did such a deep dive into the grief experience, marching him to that doorway that he went through, that I couldn't pass over with him. And then subsequently after he died, it shattered my heart, and it really broke my spirit at that time, honestly. And I just read a ton of grief books and spent a lot of time just sitting in nature and contemplating, why I was still here. Honestly, I would have traded places with them. So I went into some really deep philosophy of what is the meaning of life, and spent a lot of time with my black lab dog. We had a black lab, Digby, and he really pulled me through. But then, as I write about in my chapter, as hard as that was, that grief experience, grief wasn't done with me yet. And so, a year and a half after my husband died, I think what we see in this book is a lot of people write about it. And it was my experience too. Many of our friends and family don't know how to deal with us when we're in a critical state of grief. They just get uncomfortable with the amount of pain that we're in, and so they fall away. But I had one friend, Bevan, and she became a stronger friend after Brad died. She just loved me anyway. She said things like, "You do grief your way. I just love you anyway." And she was such a helper during that time, and I was so incredibly grateful for her love and friendship. And the following summer, after my husband died, she contracted a fatal brain virus and died within 6 weeks. And I was with her during that whole when the symptoms started, in the emergency room and in the hospital, all of that. And she left behind, really tragic. She was 42 years old, left behind a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. And I honestly, I just couldn't. It felt so personal. Like, why is this happening to her, and why is this happening to me? And again, I tended to run into nature, as Chris said. I needed my mountain biking. I needed my skiing. I needed just sitting by a river, or hiking, and that really helped me. But honestly, what helped me through that the most, I'm just going to say it, is my dog. He was the best dog in the whole world. And I know a lot of dog owners feel that way about their dog. And I certainly felt that way about Digby as a black lab. And he pulled me through and pulled me forward for another 6 years, that he lived after Brad had died. And one of my husband's deathbed wishes was that I would scatter his ashes from this high mountain place on our favorite mountain, Mount Hood. And it's a place called Illumination Rock. And you put your skis on your back and you hike straight up, the climber's route, actually, for Mount Hood. So you're boot packing straight up these glaciers. It's a long way up there. And then when you get to the place where you would have to put on crampons and be roped in with somebody else and need an ice axe, you reach this place up there called Pyramid Rock, and then you put your skis on and you traverse over to Illumination Rock. And that was where my husband wanted his ashes scattered. And in fact, I did scatter his ashes up there the following year after he died. And that was, to that point, the second hardest day of my life after the day he died. It's just a long way to go by yourself. And I had not only his urn of ashes, which is heavy, but also his black lab from before Digby's urn of ashes. And then my grief was heavy. So that was physically challenging and spiritually and emotionally challenging to make that trip up there and to leave his ashes and up in that high mountain place. So I was so grateful to have Marley's ashes to leave with his that day. So his deathbed wish was not only that I would scatter his ashes with Marley's, but that when our black lab Digby died, that I would take his ashes there too. And I'm here to tell you, any human will do whatever they can to honor the deathbed wishes of the person they love most. And so um, Digby died 2 days shy of the 6 year anniversary of Brad dying. He died in his bed in a January day with the back door open and the cold air coming in and in my arms, just exactly how Brad had died. And I think I would have gone into a really deep state of depression. I had praying to God to bring me someone to lean into for when Digby died, because I really didn't want to face it alone. And I will tell you, I felt very alone in that 6 years, but you're never alone when you're with a dog, ever. And so after he was gone, I started to really comprehend what being alone felt like. And if it wasn't for this mission, this deathbed mission, I think I would have really gone into a bad place. But about 3 weeks after Digby died, I started thinking, like, I've got to get my energy up. I can't just lay around the house crying all the time. I need to get back on my skis. I need to get back in shape to do this mountain climb. And so I booked a couple of ski trips. And on one of those ski trips, I met Bentley and fell in love with him. And one of our very first conversations was around this trip I was going to take up to Illumination Rock. He was an ex-Ironman. He was fit. He had a Boy Scouts honor. He had a hero's heart, and he wanted to take that trip with me. And the sad truth of it is, the tragedy here is that he had a blocked artery in his heart, and he died up there on that mountain when we had gained elevation and we're about to put our skis on to go over to Illumination Rock. So he collapsed onto his knees on that mountain and died in my arms of a heart attack. And Chris, that grief was so dramatic because there was so much trauma. It was so out of the blue, and I couldn't believe that this was the life that I was living. That I was going to have another grief experience whereby I really thought that God had a great plan for me after all this grief, that there was going to be love and laughter, and it was just so brief. So I could write a whole book about my experience of that day. Obviously, I only have about 7 pages in the book, and so really my chapter just catalogs these griefs without going into a lot of detail about how each of those experiences felt. But losing Bentley up on that mountain was the most dramatic thing I've ever been through. It was the hardest day of my life, and I almost lost my mind, honestly. So I retreated into nature. I slept in the back of my truck in wild places in Idaho and Oregon. And I just needed that. I needed to just hunker down in the back of my truck, and lightning and thunderstorms all around and raging rivers and wilderness, tall pines and trees with wind blowing through those. All those things helped me to start to come down from that state of alarm that I was in, having to, after all the events of that day, to gather the team and everything it takes to take a body off the mountain and to, face the rest of my life now with this incredible new grief and trauma. And because I had been through so much grief with my husband dying, I knew that I had some tools in my toolbox this time. So I knew what it was going to take to get through. And I knew it wasn't going to be fast or easy. I knew this was the rest of my life. And so nature writing was one of the things that really I needed to process the thoughts and feelings, this kaleidoscope of experiences I was going through. So I wrote a ton of poetry, and I published my book of prose and poetry that chronologues my experience through grief. I published that last year. It's called Illumination: A Griever's Journey Through the Darkness. And that starts the night my husband dies of cancer, and then takes me through his death, Bentley, my dog's death, and Bentley's death. So yeah, it was a lot, and I still cry. I still cry a lot. There's still, you know, grief is with you forever.
Well, Shaleem, I just wanted to say, and for listeners listening, by the way, I had some authors drop out of the book in the process of writing this thing, and it was a real honor to meet Shaleem in my previous podcast and earlier this year. And I do want to encourage you guys, go listen to Shaleem's episode after you get done listening to this one, because she has a very, very powerful story, more in detail than we're able to cover today. But I was really grateful for her to become part of this book because her story and her chapter about going through grief and loss, it is very sad in some ways, but the way that she writes about grief and loss, it makes you very empowered as you walk through that journey with her. And you can, I will say, Shalane, I feel like Digby is more of a person than a dog in so many ways when I read your chapter. I just like get that idea. He was just such much bigger of a personality than just a dog. And he
Totally.
was there for
To-
you through so many rough parts of this grief journey. It was just a beautiful relationship you had with him.
Thank you. Yeah, and I do want to leave the listener with that sense. I mean, grief is hard, and there's no magic wand. Nobody can take that pain away from you. You can't run away and escape it. You really have to feel it to heal it. But there is an incredible strength, I will say, that comes through facing your suffering. And one of the things I think grief has really taught me is to see beauty in the broken. And at first, when they're gone, all you want is that they're back. That's all that you want. But as time marches on and progresses, you start to really realize how much you treasure those experiences that you had together. Because you hold them in this treasure chest in your heart. Every laugh, every kiss, every joy shared, every moment in nature, every sunset, sunrise. Looking at the stars, just all of those things. We carry them inside of us as we carry the love that we have for them inside of us. So
You,
there is empowerment in it. Nobody would choose grief to become empowered, but there's only one way to have the kind of grit that us grievers have, and that's by going through that fire.
Shalane, you were reminding me of a quote in your chapter as you were talking, and so I want to read that to listeners today. If you go to page 89 in the book, when you guys get a copy of this and you're reading Shaleem's chapter, at the top you'll see a quote that says, "Perhaps after all, a broken heart is like a broken mirror with more places to reflect light." And I couldn't help when I read this chapter what was really empowering because I hiked a lot growing up. I go on remote old mine abandoned mine trails out in the mountains where it's just pristine nature out there, much like you did in your healing process. And when I read about the part where Bentley passed away on the mountain, I was envisioning being up at high altitude. There's barely any cell phone service out there for you guys that don't do this stuff. It's rare if you get cell phone service. On top of that, you can't run down the mountain in 5 minutes. You just can't. And so you are in many ways very stuck, very trapped, if something happens, it's just I don't know what to do at that point. Your mind just kind of blanks out and you get into this free state of things. And as I was reading your chapter, I couldn't help but feel this overwhelming sense of empathy for that moment and what that must have been like for you. Because not only did you spread the ashes of your husband up there, I know Digby's ashes are up there too, and to just go through so much loss in such a remote place and to really be alone with it is just, it was such a powerful moment of that chapter where I saw insurmountable strength within you that you had to have. It wasn't like you got an option for it. You had to have it and you had to find it. And it showed such a testament to when we go through big grief and loss that even in those moments that are the hardest, we have that inner strength within us to find a way through that moment. And it is not, by the way, easy. It is not, something you can easily walk through and move quickly through. It's very mucky, very messy, very challenging. There's so many emotions that go through the process, and I felt like in that part of the chapter, you really laid out to us what that moment is like, and that it's okay for us to be where we are in that moment. I felt there's sense of just you were very raw with us about where you were at in that moment, and it made it feel like when I was thinking about my grief that it was okay to be the way we are in those moments. We didn't need to be anything other than ourselves, and you just communicated that so well in that part of your chapter.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. I did go back that day. I didn't scatter Digby's ashes. We didn't make it to Elimination Rock. So, about 5 weeks later, I returned to Mount Hood. And by then, I was a lot weaker because grief has a way of making you not want to eat enough and not want to exercise. So, I didn't, eat enough or exercise for that 5 weeks. I was just holding on to my sanity. But I knew I couldn't go home because I live in Arkansas now. I couldn't go home with Digby's ashes. So that was a really tremendously strength-inducing day as well when I went back to that mountain and I was do or die going to make it up to Illumination Rock that day. And of course, past the place where Bentley died, back for the first time to the place I had scattered my husband's ashes and to finally release Digby's ashes. And the conditions had really changed at the mountain. Anyone who's a skier knows that like off piste, it had all melted, and then refrozen. So it was really icy out there. It was hard to get a purchase for the walk, and then you ski down and it's miles and miles to ski down. So that was a really intense day for me too. I didn't have time in the chapter to really talk about like how that felt, empowered and strong, but also just so strangely numb and empty when I was done with it and I was back at the parking lot at the end of all that and having completed this mission with so much more death involved than I had ever imagined, so much more trauma and strength than I ever imagined I would have encountered, and realizing what a gift it was that my husband gave me that mission because it gave my life a sense of purpose. And I think we do need to have a sense of purpose within our suffering. That's really an important thing. And I sat there and I was just wept, and I was so grateful for him to give me that purpose to find my strength again before I would have to go and you know just engage with the normal world, which just feels so very strange when you've been in this altered state that grief puts you in.
Well, I think that's, you hit on something really big that I talk about in grief a lot is when we go through a lot of grief or trauma or loss, the world seems very, very different in so many ways. And we almost, by the way, feel like we don't fit in anymore. We don't really know where our place is or where we're going to be okay or where we feel safe sometimes. We lose all sense of that. And it becomes this place of rediscovering that is, I think, one of the hardest parts of going through grief and the healing process. Shaleem, I wanted to ask you, writing this story in this book, writing your chapter and sharing with people this very powerful story that has helped me in many ways. I've read it many times through the editing process, and I think it's one of the most beautiful chapters in the book. What was this experience like for you to write your story down and have this be in a book? And what did you take away from that writing process?
Such a gift. I had written through the whole experience in real time while I was going through it, writing tons of poems after Bentley died and after Brad died and Digby died. So writing was really, but it was all in poetry and in prose, and it was in real time. So that, and your brain doesn't work normally. That part of language shuts down when you're in the, ground zero of the experience. And so, fast forward, I'm, 2.5 years out from Bentley dying, I have perspective of hindsight, and that part of my brain is turned back on. So writing my story down as just a normal narrative rather than through the art and language of poetry, it was really healing for me to just kind of, consolidate it down into a short package and kind of my elevator speech or TED Talk speech, length of time, and just realized really how powerful it was. And, I didn't write about my best friend Bevan dying at all in Illumination Grief, my Griever's Journey book. I just didn't. I didn't have any poems for her. And so I don't know why. I think I just my brain really blanked out. I was so overwhelmed that happened, and I had been so deep in my grief experience that I can't explain it, but every grief is different. She's here in my heart, and it was really significant. But there were no poems, and so it was really nice to be able to include her in this chapter and say that was a really significant death too. And
Mhm.
so I really I felt like I didn't really ever grieve Bevan the way that she deserved. So I really appreciated being able to include her in this chapter.
I think it was such a. I'm so glad we got to learn more about Bevan today, by the way, because I didn't get to know much about that in the writing side of things. But I do want to honor her, by the way, because I do feel that was such a part of your grieving process that you went through. And she was somebody there for you in many ways. And the fact that you were there for her in that moment of life, the same way you were for Brad and Bentley and Digby, it shows just what a big heart you have through grief. And I feel. What I feel from your chapter, by the way, is this overwhelming sense of resiliency, this strength and this love and this compassion and this empathy. It just exudes off you and this big energy field around you. And I think that, as much as all those losses were painful, I think it shed light on that beautiful gift that you have that you continue to keep giving people. I wanted to ask you, before we wrap up the podcast, how do you hope to help people with your story?
It's my story, but it's this whole book, Chris. My mom was here this week, and we started reading. We just started reading the book from the beginning, and we read them out loud to each other. And what I realized is like my story is powerful, but I was just blown away by the quality of writing and the ability of each author to really describe the grief experience, because I felt like mine had so much that it was almost like here's the narrative of what I went through, and there were some really raw moments, but all and some stoicism and some beauty. But some of these other people who only maybe had one loss, they could really go into this sort of out of body experience, this disassociative experience, this isolating experience, this the heartbreak of the experience in more depth than I was, and they did it with incredible language. And so I really feel like it's so wonderful that this book also catalogs a lot of different kind of griefs, so that anyone could find something that they feel like they can relate to in this book. And because I would everything is written first person from the actual griever, but I was reading it with my mom, and she's one step out, right? She's grieving because of my grief, and she will tell you that that day Bentley died on the mountain, when I called her from up there, it was amazing that I had cell coverage, and she was expecting me to say we made it to Elimination Rock, and the mission is done, and instead I'm screaming and saying Bentley just died. She will tell you that was the worst day of her life too. And so those of us who are close to the fire, but maybe not at ground zero, they also get burnt. And but those are the people that often have no idea how to support the person who's really grieving. And so I think this book is going to help not just people who are the ones grieving, but those who are close to the griever, to even understand what their experience is that they're going through.
That's absolutely beautiful because I have certainly walked that walk in my journey a lot where there's been a lot of people around me that do not know how to hold space, do not know how to resonate with us and understand what we go through. And I think to your point, what you're saying is that we don't have to experience what someone else went through, but we can learn through the stories and learn through their experience how to hold space for them and how to understand them with some empathy and compassion and learn from ourselves how best to hold space for somebody going through grief. That's such a beautiful message, Shaleem. Well, what I want to share with you guys really quickly, when you do get the book, Shaleem's page is going to be here. That's the start of her chapter. And when you get to the back of her chapter, I want you guys to know that you'll find a picture of her and a bio of her, as well as links to her website. And you guys reach out and connect with her. She's a beautiful person, if you've seen today. I also want to share with you guys too. Shaleem is an avid mountain biker, which I love. I've watched this girl jump 30 feet on the Facebook videos. It's absolutely amazing. But more importantly, what I do want to highlight is that she went through grief and really embraced poetry and writing. And a book that she sent to me early on when we first met, it is absolutely beautiful book called Illumination, and it's a collection of poetry from all of her grief experiences. And I just want to say if you guys get the Empower Grief Journey book, that's awesome. But I would really want to let you guys know, find her book Illumination on Amazon. It is an absolutely beautiful book. If you are going through some grief and loss, or even just hard time in life, you can find a lot of comfort and solace in that book as well. And I think you'll learn a lot more about her, reaching out to connect with her. Shaleem, just before we wrap up the podcast, if people want to connect with you after this, where can they find you?
My website is called illuminationgriefcounseling.com. So you can find me there. You can find me on Facebook or Instagram as well. And yeah, capture some of my grief poetry and also obviously the mountain biking, which gets a lot of viewer hits.
Well, I will be calling you when I get a mountain bike again because things have changed a lot since I got the last one. So, well, for listeners, I will have all of Shaleem's social media, website links all in the show notes. Please reach out and connect with her. As you guys have seen today, she has a beautiful grief story and an even more empowering healing journey. And I can safely and confidently tell you that if you can go through that many losses and the circumstances in which she went through it, I have very much hope for you guys that you can become empowered through the story in her chapter to find your own empowered grief journey and know that healing is out there for you. And it doesn't have to come in big ways, by the way, small steps at a time and learning how to be kind with yourself. And from one nature lover to another, I'm just going to say nature is very, very healing. So get out there in the forest, get out there in the mountains, get out there by the rivers. It can do wonders for you. Shaleem, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today.
Thank you, Chris. I always appreciate you.
And so, for listeners, thank you for joining Shaleem and I on today's episode of the Empowered Grief Journey minicast. I'll be back with another episode with another author in the book here soon, so you guys can get a different variety of the for joining us. And we'll talk to you soon.